The Zephyrian fleet hung in space like a swarm of metal locusts, their ships blotting out the stars around Earth's moon. Admiral Kethvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the small blue planet through the viewport. His forearms crossed behind his back, the way his species showed confidence before delivering ultimatums. "Send the message," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had conquered 17 star systems. The transmission crackled across every human communication device on Earth. Television screens flickered to life in homes, radios buzzed in cars, and emergency broadcasts overrode everything else. The alien's face appeared, elongated skull, 6 black eyes arranged in perfect symmetry, and skin that looked like polished obsidian. "People of Earth," Kethvar began, his words translated by technology. Humanity couldn't even comprehend. "I am Admiral Kethvar of the Galactic Coalition. Your species has been deemed problematic. Your expansion into space, your aggressive nature, your refusal to follow proper protocols. All of this ends now." In living rooms across the planet, families gathered around their screens. Children clung to their parents as the alien continued speaking. "You have 5 of your days to make a choice. Submit completely to Coalition authority. Accept our rule and your species will be allowed to continue existing as servants. Refuse, and we will demonstrate why 47 other species chose submission over extinction." The transmission showed images that made even hardened military officers look away. Planets reduced to glass and ash, cities that once held millions now nothing but craters. The Coalition didn't just defeat their enemies. They erased them so completely that archaeologists would never find proof they had existed. "Choose wisely," Kethvar finished. "We will return in 5 days for your answer." The screens went dark. President Martinez sat in the Situation Room, surrounded by generals, admirals, and advisors. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Everyone knew the math. Earth's most advanced weapons were like throwing rocks at a hurricane compared to what they'd just witnessed. "Options?" Martinez asked, though his voice suggested he already knew there weren't any good ones. General Morrison cleared his throat. "Madam President, our nuclear arsenal might scratch their paint. Their smallest ship is the size of Manhattan, and our satellites detect at least 300 vessels. So we're talking about surrender," Secretary of Defense Williams said flatly. "We're talking about survival," corrected Dr. Sarah Chen, the President's science advisor. "These aliens have technology that makes our best efforts look primitive. They're offering to let humanity live. As slaves," Admiral Burke growled. The old naval officer had fought in 3 wars and never retreated from anything. "Madam President, with respect, there has to be another option." Around the table, heads shook. The military leaders had run every simulation, consulted every expert. Earth's defense satellites couldn't even penetrate the alien shields. Their weapons were centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. "Sir," a young aide interrupted, sliding a tablet across the table, "we're receiving thousands of messages from world leaders. The Europeans want to negotiate. The Asian Federation is asking for more time. South America is requesting asylum for their populations." President Martinez stared at the tablet. Every option led to the same conclusion. In 5 days, humanity would kneel before an alien empire, or humanity would cease to exist. But in a small bar outside Camp Pendleton, one man sat alone, staring at the news broadcast replaying the alien ultimatum. Staff Sergeant Michael "Tank" Rodriguez had been drinking beer and watching the game when the transmission interrupted everything. Now he sat in stunned silence, watching the footage of dead worlds. The other Marines in the bar were talking in hushed tones, their voices mixing fear with anger. These were men and women trained to fight, trained to never give up, and now they were being told their entire species had to choose between slavery and death. "What do you think, Tank?" Corporal Jenkins asked. Rodriguez was known for his straight talk and his refusal to back down from anyone or anything. Rodriguez took a long sip of his beer and stared at the screen showing the alien fleet. "I think," he said slowly, "that they've never met a United States Marine." The bar fell quiet. Everyone knew Rodriguez wasn't just talking tough. The man had earned his nickname by walking through enemy fire like it was rain, and he'd never retreated from a fight in 15 years of service. "They're giving us 5 days," Rodriguez continued, standing up. 5 days to be afraid. 5 days to convince ourselves we can't win. 5 days to talk ourselves into giving up everything our ancestors died to protect. He walked to the window and looked up at the night sky, where the alien ships were visible as moving stars. But here's what they don't understand about humans. We don't just fight when we can win. We fight when it matters. And freedom? That matters more than breathing. The other Marines watched him, something shifting in their expressions. Rodriguez turned back to face them. In 5 days, our leaders are going to have to give those aliens an answer. And I think it's time we reminded everyone what kind of answer Americans give to bullies. Outside, the alien fleet continued its silent orbit, confident that another species would choose survival over pride. They had seen it 47 times before. Fear always won in the end. But they had never encountered humans before, and they certainly had never met a United States Marine who refused to surrender. The next morning, Rodriguez walked into Camp Pendleton with a purpose that made other Marines step aside. Word had spread about what he'd said in the bar, and now everyone watched him with a mixture of curiosity and hope. In a world suddenly full of impossible choices, here was someone who refused to accept defeat. Colonel Harrison was in his office, staring at casualty projections that made no sense. How do you calculate losses when the enemy can destroy planets? How do you plan a defense against technology that could turn Earth into another dead rock floating in space? Sir, Rodriguez knocked on the doorframe. Permission to speak freely. Harrison looked up, recognizing the Marine who'd earned 3 Purple Hearts and a Medal of Honor. Rodriguez, I suppose you've got thoughts about our situation? Yes, sir, I do. Rodriguez stepped into the office and closed the door. I think we're asking the wrong question, which is, everyone's asking how we can survive this. I think we should be asking how we can make them regret coming here. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Sergeant, I've seen the intelligence reports. Their smallest weapon could level New York. Their shields can stop anything we can throw at them. We're not talking about fighting an enemy. We're talking about fighting gods. Rodriguez sat down without being invited, something that would normally earn him disciplinary action. But these weren't normal times. Sir, with respect, that's exactly what they want us to think. They're using fear as a weapon, making us defeat ourselves before the first shot is fired. The fear is justified, Rodriguez. They've shown us what they can do. They've shown us what they can do to helpless planets, sir. They've never shown us what they can do to someone who fights back. Harrison studied the Marine's face. Rodriguez wasn't speaking from bravado or ignorance. This was a man who'd stared down death multiple times and never blinked. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe they picked the wrong species to threaten. Humans don't respond well to ultimatums. And Americans? We have a history of telling superior forces to go to hell. Meanwhile, in Washington, the debates raged through the night. The president had called an emergency session of Congress, though everyone knew the Constitution didn't cover alien invasions. Representatives and senators argued over options that didn't exist, each speech more desperate than the last. We have to consider the survival of our species, Congresswoman Mitchell pleaded. If we fight, they'll wipe us out. At least as servants, humanity continues. As slaves, Senator Thompson shot back. You're talking about trading our freedom for the mere biological continuation of human DNA. That's not humanity. That's livestock. The Speaker of the House called for order, but the chamber remained in chaos. Outside the Capitol building, crowds had gathered. Some held signs calling for surrender, others demanded resistance. The divisions that had always existed in human society were now magnified by the ultimate choice. But back at Camp Pendleton, something different was happening. Rodriguez had been talking to other Marines, and his message was spreading like wildfire through the ranks. Not surrender. Not acceptance, defiance. The way I see it, Rodriguez told a group of young Marines, they made one big mistake. They gave us 5 days to think about it. How is that a mistake? Private Chen asked. Because they don't understand what happens when you give Americans time to get angry. They think 5 days is enough for fear to set in. What they don't realize is that 5 days is enough for us to remember who we are. By the 3rd day, something remarkable was happening. Videos were spreading across social media of Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen making statements. Not official statements from the Pentagon, personal declarations from individual service members. My name is Captain Sarah Williams, United States Air Force. I'm a fighter pilot and I've never run from a fight. I'm not starting now. Staff Sergeant Mike O'Brien, Army Rangers. I took an oath to defend this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I didn't see an exception for aliens. Petty Officer Jennifer Martinez. Navy SEAL. Freedom isn't negotiable. Each video showed the same thing. Americans in uniform, looking directly into the camera, stating their refusal to surrender. No speeches about victory or strategy. Just simple declarations that they would rather die as free humans than live as alien slaves. The videos reached the White House by the fourth day. President Martinez watched them in the Oval Office, tears streaming down her face. Her advisors sat in silence, understanding that something fundamental had shifted. "Madam President," General Morrison said quietly, "the Joint Chiefs have been meeting. We want you to know that regardless of what decision you make diplomatically, the United States military stands ready to follow your orders. Even if those orders mean certain death? Especially then, ma'am." Dr. Chen cleared her throat. "Madam President, I've been analyzing the alien technology. Their ships are powerful, but they're not invincible. They have weaknesses we might be able to exploit, such as overconfidence. They've conquered 47 worlds without significant resistance. They're not prepared for an enemy that refuses to give up." By evening of the fourth day, something unprecedented was happening around the world. Military units were declaring their intention to fight regardless of government decisions. Veterans were coming out of retirement. Citizens were volunteering for whatever resistance movements might form. The aliens had offered humanity a choice between slavery and death. What they hadn't expected was for humans to create a third option, dying free while taking as many aliens with them as possible. And at Camp Pendleton, Rodriguez stood before a formation of Marines who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They had no plan that could win. They had no weapons that could pierce alien shields. They had no strategy that made sense against such overwhelming odds. What they had was something the aliens had never encountered in 47 conquered worlds: the absolute refusal to surrender. "Regardless of the cost, tomorrow," Rodriguez told them, "the president gives the aliens our answer. And tonight we make sure she knows what that answer should be." On the fifth day, the world held its breath. The alien deadline had arrived, and every news station, every social media platform, every communication device was focused on one question: would humanity surrender or face extinction? President Martinez stood in the Oval Office, looking out at the crowds gathered on the White House lawn. Signs waved in the morning breeze, some calling for peace, others demanding resistance. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed down on her shoulders like a mountain. Her chief of staff entered quietly. "Madam President, the aliens are hailing us. They want our answer." "And what answer should I give them, Robert?" Martinez asked, not turning from the window. "The only answer Americans have ever given to tyrants, ma'am." Martinez nodded slowly. She had watched the videos of service members declaring their refusal to surrender. She had read the reports of ordinary citizens volunteering for hopeless resistance missions. She had seen what happened when you threatened the freedom of people who valued it more than life itself. "Put me through to Admiral Kethvar," she said. The alien appeared on the secure screen, his 6 black eyes reflecting what he undoubtedly thought was inevitable victory. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship hummed with activity as his fleet maintained its threatening orbit around Earth. "President Martinez," Kethvar said, his translated voice carrying casual confidence, "I trust you have made the wise choice. 47 other species found submission preferable to extinction." Martinez straightened her shoulders and looked directly into the camera. "Admiral Kethvar, I have consulted with my people, my military, and my conscience. I have an answer for you." "Excellent. When should we expect your unconditional surrender?" "You shouldn't." The alien's expression shifted slightly, though his features were difficult for humans to read. "I believe there has been a translation error. Could you repeat your response?" "You heard correctly, Admiral. The United States of America and the human species formally and completely reject your ultimatum. We will not surrender. We will not submit. We will not bow to anyone or anything that threatens our freedom." For the first time in his long military career, Kethvar felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a junior officer: confusion. "President Martinez, I believe you misunderstand your situation. Your species lacks the technology to resist us. Your defeat is mathematically certain." "Maybe," Martinez replied, "but here's something you need to understand about humans, Admiral. We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because fighting is right. That is illogical. To you, perhaps, but not to us. You've given us 5 days to choose between slavery and death. We choose neither. We choose to die free while making you pay the highest price possible for every inch of our world. On the alien flagship, the bridge crew exchanged glances. In 47 previous conquests, this conversation had never happened. Species either surrendered immediately upon seeing the fleet's power, or surrendered after a demonstration of that power. None had ever simply refused both options. You would sacrifice your entire species for the abstract concept of freedom? Kethavar asked. Admiral, Martinez said, her voice growing stronger. You clearly don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans have a saying, give me liberty or give me death. We've been dying for freedom since before we could travel between stars. We've fought wars that lasted decades over the principle that no one has the right to rule another without consent. She paused, letting that sink in. You want to know about human nature? Let me tell you about a place called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off an army of thousands because they refused to surrender. Let me tell you about the Alamo, where men died rather than yield to superior forces. Let me tell you about Warsaw, where people fought tanks with bottles and courage. Kethavar's tactical computer was running probability calculations. The mathematics were clear. Humanity had no chance of victory. Yet something in the president's tone was triggering warnings in his combat algorithms. Your historical references are irrelevant, he said. Those were conflicts between species of similar technological development. We possess weapons that can crack planets. And we possess something you've apparently never encountered in 47 conquests, Martinez replied. The absolute refusal to live as slaves regardless of the consequences. At Camp Pendleton, Rodriguez and his Marines were watching the transmission on every available screen. When the president finished speaking, the base erupted in cheers that could be heard for miles. This was the answer they had hoped for, the response that honored every American who had ever died for freedom. But across the galaxy, in the coalition's governing chambers, other beings were watching the same transmission with growing unease. The Vorthon counselor, whose species had been the 31st to surrender, found himself remembering the pride his people had once felt before fear overwhelmed them. Did she just? Counselor Veltar began. She refused, confirmed his aide. Completely. They're choosing extinction over submission. But that's impossible. No species chooses extinction. The survival instinct is too strong. Yet here were humans, not only rejecting the coalition's ultimatum, but doing so with a confidence that suggested they considered surrender the greater evil than death. Back on the flagship, Kethavar was consulting with his officers. According to their databases, this had never happened. Every species, when faced with overwhelming force, chose survival over principle. It was a universal constant, as reliable as gravity or entropy. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, I'm detecting massive activity across the planet. Military installations are powering up. Civilian populations are mobilizing. They appear to be preparing for war. Impossible. They must know they cannot win. Sir, I don't think they care. Through the flagship's sensors, they could see Earth's pathetic defenses coming online. Missiles that couldn't penetrate coalition shields. Fighter craft that moved like insects compared to alien technology. Ground forces armed with chemical propellants and primitive explosives. It should have been amusing. Instead, something about the sight of hopelessly outgunned humans preparing to fight anyway made Kethavar's combat instincts scream warnings he didn't understand. Sir, his communications officer called out. We're receiving another transmission from Earth. It's from their military forces. On the screen appeared a new figure. A human in military dress, ribbons and medals covering his chest. Weathered face showing the scars of previous battles. General Morrison looked directly into the camera with the eyes of a man who had accepted death long ago. To the alien fleet currently threatening Earth, Morrison began. This is General James Morrison, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I have a message for you from the United States Armed Forces. The bridge fell silent. We've been watching you for 5 days, Morrison continued. We've analyzed your ship, studied your weapons, calculated the odds. You're right, you can destroy us. But here's what you need to understand. We're going to make you work for it. Morrison's image was replaced by footage of military preparations worldwide. Submarines diving to maximum depth, fighter pilots checking their weapons, ground forces fortifying positions they knew were indefensible. Every inch you take, you'll pay for in blood. Every human city you destroy will make cost you ships and lives. You may conquer Earth, but you'll remember the price for the rest of your existence. The transmission ended, leaving the alien bridge in stunned silence. For the first time in his career, Admiral Kethvar wondered if the Coalition had made a mistake. The Coalition's response was swift and overwhelming. Kethvar ordered a demonstration, the complete destruction of Luna Base, humanity's small research station on the moon. The base housed 300 scientists and support staff, who had volunteered to remain at their posts despite the evacuation order. From Earth, 8 billion people watched as alien weapons reduced the base to plasma and vapor in mere seconds. The moon's surface bore a new crater where human dreams of space exploration had once lived. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who defy us. What Kethvar didn't expect was Earth's response. Instead of the panic and surrender he anticipated, something else happened. Every major city on Earth went dark for exactly 1 minute. Not from alien attack, but from humans turning off their lights in memorial for the Luna Base crew. When the lights came back on, they revealed something that made the alien admiral's tactical computers recalculate everything. Every military installation on Earth was fully operational and broadcasting the same message. Luna Base, your sacrifice is honored. Your deaths will be avenged. More disturbing to the aliens was what came next. Instead of preparing defensive positions, human forces were moving into attack formations. Instead of trying to protect their cities, they were positioning to strike at landing zones. Instead of acting like a species facing extinction, they were behaving like a military force preparing for offensive operations. This is unprecedented, Kethvar's science officer reported. Our psychological profiles indicate that after witnessing our demonstration, humans should be in complete psychological collapse. Instead, their aggression indicators are increasing. Rodriguez stood before his assembled Marines at Camp Pendleton, watching the crater on the moon through telescopes. The 300 people who died there had been scientists, engineers, dreamers who wanted to push humanity toward the stars. Now they were gone, vaporized by aliens who thought fear was the ultimate weapon. They killed 300 Americans, Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying to every Marine in the formation. 300 people whose only crime was believing in human potential. The Marines listened in absolute silence. Many had friends or family members who worked in space programs. The Luna Base massacre had made this personal in a way that ultimatums and threats never could. Now they're waiting for us to break, Rodriguez continued. They're expecting us to see what they did to Luna Base and decide that resistance is hopeless. They think they understand human psychology. He turned to face his men and women, Marines who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. But they've made a fundamental error in their calculations. They think fear is stronger than rage. They think survival instinct is stronger than honor. They think we're just another species that will choose slavery over death. Rodriguez pointed at the crater on the moon, visible even in daylight. They're about to learn the difference between humans and the 47 species that surrendered before us. We don't just fight when we can win. We fight hardest when someone hurts our people. At that moment, something unprecedented in galactic history was happening. Instead of the fear and submission the Coalition expected, humanity was experiencing a collective rage that transcended national boundaries, political differences, and cultural divisions. In Moscow, Russian Spetsnaz forces were loading weapons that couldn't penetrate alien armor, knowing they would die, not caring about anything except making the aliens pay. In Beijing, Chinese pilots were fueling fighters that couldn't match alien speed, determined to ram their aircraft into enemy ships if conventional weapons failed. In London, British SAS units were planning operations behind enemy lines that would accomplish nothing except proving that humans refused to accept conquest. The pattern repeated across the globe. Military forces preparing attacks that violated every principle of tactical logic. Civilian populations volunteering for resistance movements that had no chance of success. Scientists working desperately to find weaknesses in alien technology, knowing they had hours instead of years. Admiral Kethvar was beginning to realize that 47 previous conquests had not prepared him for this. Every other species had followed predictable patterns: initial resistance, demonstration of power, psychological collapse, surrender. Humans seemed to be operating according to completely different rules. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we're intercepting human communications." They're not discussing surrender terms or evacuation procedures. They're sharing tactical information for attacking our forces. Show me. The screen filled with intercepted human transmissions. Military radio chatter focused on alien ship vulnerabilities. Scientific discussions about potential weaknesses in coalition technology. Civilian broadcasts teaching urban warfare techniques to ordinary citizens. Most disturbing were the personal messages. Humans saying goodbye to family members, not with despair but with determination. Parents telling children to remember who they were. Soldiers promising to make every alien death count for something. They're treating this as if victory is still possible, Kethvar's tactical officer observed. Their mathematics must be defective. They have no chance of winning. Sir, the communications officer interrupted. We're receiving another transmission from Earth. This one is different. The main screen activated, showing a single human in military uniform. But this wasn't a general or admiral. This was an enlisted Marine, sitting in what appeared to be a military barracks. Behind him, other soldiers moved with quiet purpose, checking weapons and equipment. Rodriguez looked directly into the camera with the calm expression of a man who had accepted his fate and found peace with it. My name is Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps, he began. I'm speaking for every human who has ever worn a uniform, carried a weapon, or stood between their people and those who would harm them. On the alien flagship, the bridge crew leaned forward. Something about this human's tone was different from the politicians and generals who had spoken before. You want to know about human nature? Rodriguez continued. Let me tell you about human nature. We're the species that looked at fire and decided to tame it. We looked at oceans and built ships to cross them. We looked at the sky and figured out how to fly. He paused, and for a moment the only sound was the quiet activity of Marines preparing for battle. We're also the species that has never, in our entire history, accepted permanent defeat. Every time someone has tried to conquer us, enslave us, or break our spirit, we found a way to fight back. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes generations. But we always fight back. Rodriguez stood up, and the camera followed him to a window where other Marines were visible in the distance, training with weapons that couldn't penetrate alien shields. You've conquered 47 species, congratulations. But you've never faced humans before. And the thing about humans is that we don't calculate odds when our freedom is at stake. We don't weigh costs when our families are threatened. We don't surrender when our home is invaded. He turned back to the camera and his expression hardened. You killed 300 of our people today. You think that makes us afraid? You're wrong. That makes us angry. And there's nothing in this galaxy more dangerous than angry humans with nothing left to lose. The transmission ended, leaving the alien bridge in absolute silence. For the first time since the fleet had arrived at Earth, Admiral Kethvar felt something he had never experienced in 47 conquests: doubt. The invasion began at dawn. Coalition forces descended on major cities across Earth, expecting the swift, overwhelming victory that had characterized their previous 47 conquests. Their battle plans were perfect, their technology superior, their tactics flawless. They had calculated everything except human stubbornness. In New York, alien dropships landed in Central Park, disgorging thousands of coalition troops equipped with energy weapons and powered armor. They expected to secure the city within hours. Instead, they found themselves fighting for every street corner against humans using weapons that shouldn't have been effective. Police officers with pistols who refused to retreat. National Guard units with rifles who kept fighting even after their equipment was destroyed. Civilians with hunting weapons who appeared from windows and rooftops, taking impossible shots before disappearing into subway tunnels. The coalition forces were winning, but they were bleeding for every victory in ways their generals had never experienced. Rodriguez and his Marines had taken positions in downtown Los Angeles, in buildings that provided no real protection against alien weapons, but offered excellent lines of sight for their own pathetic armaments. They knew they would die here. They had accepted that fact before the first shot was fired. What they hadn't accepted was dying quietly. Remember, Rodriguez called to his men as alien aircraft approached. But we're not trying to win this war. We're trying to make them remember it. The first alien troops to enter the city found themselves in a nightmare of urban warfare unlike anything in their military training. Humans popped up from manholes fired from behind cover that should have been useless, and continued fighting even after taking wounds that should have been incapacitating. More disturbing was their behavior. These humans didn't fight like a desperate, defeated species. They fought like predators who had been backed into a corner and decided to take as many enemies with them as possible. "Sir," reported Captain Zethkor from the Los Angeles battle zone, "the humans are not following standard defensive protocols. They're improvising." Admiral Kethvar watched the tactical displays with growing unease. The invasion was succeeding exactly as planned, but the cost projections were climbing far beyond acceptable parameters. Coalition forces were taking casualties at rates not seen since the ancient wars between member species. "How are they managing to inflict damage?" he demanded. "Their weapons cannot penetrate our armor. They're targeting weak points, sir. Joints in armor, optical sensors. They appear to have analyzed our equipment during the 5-day period and identified vulnerabilities we didn't know existed." That was when Rodriguez's voice crackled across. Coalition communications frequencies. Somehow the humans had managed to hack their secure channels. "Attention, alien forces," Rodriguez said, his voice calm despite the sounds of battle in the background. "This is Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. I have a message for your command." On the flagship bridge, every officer turned toward the communication station. It should have been impossible for humans to access coalition frequencies. "We've been studying you for 5 days," Rodriguez continued, "watching your ships, analyzing your tactics, learning your weaknesses. Did you really think we'd spend that time being afraid?" The transmission was coming from multiple locations simultaneously. Somehow, human forces across the globe were coordinating in ways that shouldn't have been possible with their primitive technology. "Here's what you need to understand," Rodriguez said as the sounds of combat grew louder. "Americans don't fight fair. We fight to win. And when we can't win, we fight to make you regret starting the fight in the first place." Explosions echoed through the transmission. Human voices could be heard shouting coordinates, calling for ammunition, reporting alien casualties. They were dying, but they were taking aliens with them. "Every Marine in this building is going to die today," Rodriguez admitted. "We know that. But we're going to make sure that every alien who kills one of us remembers it for the rest of their life." The transmission cut to a new frequency, showing similar scenes from around the globe. In London, British forces had turned the Thames into a killing ground, using the river to funnel alien troops into carefully prepared ambushes. In Moscow, Russians had turned the subway system into a maze of death traps that claimed alien lives with every step. But it was the voices that unsettled the coalition forces more than the tactics. Humans facing certain death who laughed as they fired their weapons. Soldiers making jokes while taking positions they knew were suicide missions. Citizens singing their national anthems while charging alien positions with weapons that couldn't possibly succeed. "Sir," reported the coalition's chief psychologist, "this behavior is completely outside our models. These humans are displaying joy in combat situations where fear should dominate. They're treating warfare as if it were recreational." Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical displays showing human forces across the globe. They were losing every engagement, but they were making each loss cost far more than any previous conquest had required. "How many casualties have we sustained?" he asked quietly. "Sir, in the first 6 hours we've lost more personnel than in the previous 3 conquests combined. The humans they're very good at this." That was when the reports started coming in from other fronts. Human forces weren't just defending their cities, they were launching counterattacks against alien positions. Suicide missions that accomplished nothing except proving that humans would rather die attacking than live defending. Rodriguez's voice returned to the coalition frequencies. But now it was different, calmer, more personal. "Admiral Kethvar," he said, and every alien on the bridge felt their hearts skip a beat. The human knew the Admiral's name. "My name is Michael Rodriguez. In about 10 minutes I'm going to die in this building. Your forces will overrun our position, and I'll take as many of them with me as I can. That's not a threat. It's a promise." The sound of approaching alien troops echoed through the transmission. "But before I die, I want you to understand something. You've conquered 47 species, but you've never conquered anyone like us. Those other species fought to survive. Humans fight to win. And when we can't win, we fight to make sure you lose something too." Weapons fire erupted in the background, growing closer. "You want to rule Earth? Fine. But understand what you're taking. You're not conquering a planet. You're inheriting a graveyard. Every human you kill will be replaced by 10 others who are angrier and more determined. Every city you destroy will become a monument to human resistance. Every day you occupy our world will cost you blood and lives and sanity. The transmission was breaking up as the battle intensified. You think you've won because you have better technology. But here's what you don't understand about humans, Admiral. We don't need better technology. We just need to be more stubborn than you are patient. Rodriguez's final words came through crystal clear, despite the chaos around him. Welcome to Earth, Admiral. I hope you're prepared for the longest, bloodiest, most expensive victory in galactic history. Because that's what it's going to take to keep us down. The transmission ended in static. On the flagship bridge, Admiral Kethvar stared at the tactical displays showing human resistance across the globe. His forces were winning, but they were paying a price that no other conquest had ever demanded. For the first time in his career, victory felt like defeat. 3 days after Rodriguez's final transmission, Admiral Kethvar stood alone in his private quarters, staring at casualty reports that defied everything he knew about warfare. His forces controlled every major human city, every important strategic location, every military installation on Earth. But they didn't control Earth. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had lost every battle and somehow made victory feel like defeat. Coalition forces held the ground, but they couldn't hold it safely. They occupied human cities, but at a cost that made the occupation questionable. Every day brought new reports of human resistance that shouldn't have been possible. Civilians with improvised weapons who appeared from nowhere, struck at alien patrols, and vanished into underground networks that seemed to span entire continents. Children who planted bombs in alien supply depots, elderly humans who sacrificed themselves to take out coalition equipment. Most disturbing were the psychological reports from his own troops. Soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds were requesting transfer away from Earth. Veterans of galactic warfare were suffering from stress disorders that coalition medicine had never encountered. The very act of occupying Earth was breaking his forces in ways that actual combat had never managed. Sir, his aide entered hesitantly. The Galactic Council is requesting a status update. Kethvar turned from the viewport where Earth hung like a blue marble of defiance. Tell them the planet is secured. And the resistance activities? Tell them that humans are proving more difficult to pacify than anticipated. That was an understatement that bordered on delusion. The humans weren't just resisting. They were teaching the galaxy a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. Every coalition victory had spawned 10 new resistance cells. Every human killed had inspired 100 others to take up arms. The tactical situation was becoming impossible. Coalition forces needed constant resupply, but human raids had made supply lines into killing grounds. Alien troops needed rest, but humans never seemed to sleep, striking at all hours with weapons that shouldn't have been effective but somehow were. More troubling were the reports from other coalition worlds. News of human resistance was spreading throughout the galaxy, reaching the 47 species that had surrendered without a fight. For the first time since their conquest, those species were asking questions about their own submission. On Vorth Prime, the planet that had been the 31st to surrender, Counselor Veltar watched human resistance footage that had somehow reached their world despite coalition censorship. His aide noticed the counselor's strange expression. Sir, the humans are dying. They're losing every engagement. Yes, Veltar said quietly, but look at how they're dying. The footage showed a human family, parents and teenage children, fighting coalition troops from their home. They had hunting rifles against energy weapons, no armor against alien technology, no chance of survival. But they fought with a ferocity that made the alien counselor remember what his own species had once been, before fear taught them submission. They're not fighting to win, Veltar observed. They're fighting to remain human. Similar scenes were playing out across coalition space. Species that had been conquered decades ago were watching humans die rather than submit, and remembering their own abandoned resistance. The very thing that was supposed to demonstrate coalition power was instead demonstrating something far more dangerous, the possibility of refusal. Back on Earth, in the ruins of what had once been downtown Los Angeles, a small monument had appeared overnight. Coalition forces had discovered it during their morning patrol, a simple marker made from concrete and metal, bearing words scratched in rough lettering. Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. He chose to die free rather than live as a slave. The monument shouldn't have existed. Coalition surveillance should have detected its construction. Security patrols should have prevented its placement. But somehow, in a city under complete alien occupation, humans had managed to honor their fallen hero. More monuments appeared daily. In New York, London, Moscow, Beijing, wherever humans had died fighting, other humans found ways to mark their sacrifice. Coalition forces destroyed the monuments as quickly as they found them. But new ones appeared faster than they could be eliminated. Admiral Kethvar realized that he was facing something no coalition commander had ever encountered: a population that valued its martyrs more than its survivors. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've intercepted another human transmission. It's being broadcast from the ruins of Camp Pendleton." The main screen activated, showing a figure in tattered Marine uniform standing in the bombed remains of Rodriguez's base. Somehow this human had reached the exact spot where Rodriguez had made his final stand. "My name is Corporal Maria Santos, United States Marine Corps," she began, her voice carrying the same unbreakable determination that had characterized Rodriguez's speeches. 3 days ago, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez died in this building, along with 47 other Marines who refused to surrender. Behind her, other figures moved in the shadows, more humans who had somehow infiltrated a heavily guarded coalition position. "You killed them," Santos continued, "but you didn't silence them. Their words are spreading across the galaxy. Their example is being followed by humans on every continent. Their sacrifice is inspiring resistance movements you can't detect and can't stop." She walked to a crater where Rodriguez had made his final stand. "You want to know the truth about humans? We don't just remember our heroes, we become them. Every time you kill one of us, you create 10 more who are willing to die for the same cause." Santos looked directly into the camera with Rodriguez's same unflinching expression. "You think you've conquered Earth, but you've made a fundamental error. You can conquer human cities, destroy human armies, kill human bodies, but you cannot conquer the human spirit. And as long as that spirit exists, you will never truly control this world." The transmission shifted to show scenes from across the globe. Humans emerging from hiding to plant charges on alien equipment. Resistance fighters using primitive weapons to devastating effect. Civilians who smiled as they died, knowing their deaths would inspire others. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told you that Americans don't fight fair," Santos said. "He was wrong about one thing. This isn't just about Americans anymore. This is about humanity, and humanity has decided that freedom is worth any price." The transmission ended, but its impact echoed across coalition space. On 47 conquered worlds, beings who had chosen submission watched humans choose death instead, and began to question whether they had made the right choice. In the coalition capital, emergency sessions were being called. For the first time in galactic history, a conquered species was making conquest seem undesirable. The very foundation of coalition power, the fear that made submission preferable to resistance, was being challenged by humans who simply refused to be afraid. Admiral Kethvar stood on his bridge, watching Earth turn slowly below his fleet. He controlled the planet, but he was beginning to understand that controlling Earth and defeating humanity were two very different things. In his 47 previous conquests, victory had meant the end of resistance. With humans, victory seemed to be just the beginning of a much longer, bloodier, and more expensive war. Rodriguez had been right about one thing. The aliens were about to learn the difference between conquering a world and pacifying humans. And across the galaxy, 47 conquered species watched the human example and began to remember what they had lost when they chose survival over freedom. The humans were teaching the galaxy that some things were worth dying for, and in a universe that had forgotten how to resist, that lesson was more dangerous than any weapon.